Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Off the Cushion podcast. Offering simplified teachings from Chan Buddhism and other traditions, Off the Cushion seeks to make meditation accessible to practitioners of all backgrounds and skill levels, helping you to find peace wherever life takes you and bring your practice into daily life. I'm Songpur Verzana, and with me is Dwayne Rester. How's it going, Dwayne?
It's going very well, son. Good to see you again.
It's great to see you as always. It's great to have everyone here. And in this episode, we're going to discuss the illusion of self, which is a quite a big topic, but we're going to try to make it condensed and accessible for people who have never really experienced this before for themselves. Um, do you want to start with a quote from Guagu about this so we can kind of frame it?
Sure. I'll start with a quote from my teacher of 15 years, and his name is Guaku, our professor Jimmy Yu at Florida State University. But this is one from one of his first books that came from a series of talks that he gave when I first met him, but one of his first books that he put in. Um, we'll try to be careful about the terminology, so please follow along. But this quote makes sense throughout what we say. Um, Selflessness is one of the core teachings that free us from attachment and suffering. It is a realization that all things, including us, are related, that they have no permanent, separate, independent self. This does not mean that we have no personality. We always have one, even after enlightenment. It's not that we do not know our name or do not know, or recognize anyone, or that our mind is blank. Enlightenment is not that at all. What is absent in the enlightenment of selflessness is a fundamental assumption of a permanent, separate, independent self with us and with all things. What we consider as separate, independent, permanent, and solid is actually the coming together of everything else. Guagu. Good
That's
quote to start off with. Yeah.
such a great quote. I'll link the book in the description for this episode. I think something that you mentioned in it, like just this key phrase, what is absent in the enlightenment of selflessness is the fundamental assumption of a permanent, separate, independent self within us and within all things. So it just kicking it off, saying that selflessness means that there is no self, that we have no selves, I think is too simple. It's too simple and nihilistic even.
Mm-hmm.
To frame it more appropriately, most of us in the cultures that we've grown up in, the societies that we've grown up in with our upbringings, have been introduced to this idea of a Cartesian self, of a single soul that is at the core of our beings that we may not even notice most of the time. This sense of me, I, myself, all the time. And that governs the way that we go about the world and our interactions with others. We're always concerned with number one and thinking that the universe revolves around that self. And this statement, as Goku has elaborated upon it, this ideal, one of the core teachings is that actually that sense of a single self that is not influenced by anything around it, not connected with anything else, is just a falsehood. That we have dynamic modes of being that are inextricably tied to the environments around us, that everything is connected and ever changing, not static, and certainly not independent. And if we think about it in that way, becomes a little bit more accessible uh, um, if we're first hearing about this idea of selflessness.
Um, I want to, so in order to understand selflessness or emptiness, was basically the same term, not selflessness, emptiness, true nature, pretty much is all the same terminology. So
Right.
it's we try not to get those things mixed up too much, but we'll use them as appropriate. But the title of this little talk is is an illusion. Now, what is an illusion? It's important to kind of parse out the terminology as we see it anyway. Well, we can think of an illusion like a magic trick. You know, somebody mixes up cards and then they pull out a card. And if you've ever watched these YouTube channels or read books about magic tricks and whatnot, and then they show you how it's done. Well, and then you go like, oh, okay, well, I see it now. But before, we were convinced that somehow somebody pulled a card out of our ear. And it's like, well, how did they do that? How did they get that from this pocket in my pocket to this pocket of this guy that just walked by?
Totally.
And we our minds spin and we can't figure it out. And so it must be real. And somehow they did it. I don't know. There's some magical supernatural power here happening, and they actually did it. There's some people that will do that, and there's some people that say, boy, would you show me that? And then they show them, they make sense, and then they do another magic trick, and then here we are again being pulled away by an illusion. So that's one type. There's all sorts of nice art projects. We'll call them art projects or whatever. One of my favorite ones most recently is when people will take, I'll call it garbage art. I don't know what it's fundamentally called, but where they'll line up certain things. And if you look at it from just straight point this way, it looks like a man sitting on a chair.
Yes.
But if you look at it from any other angle, it's like, what is that pile of crap over there in the corner? Well, look at it from this way, and then you think, oh, wow, that's really good. That is a man sitting on a chair. When in fact, it's not what it is at all. So there's, those kind of things are one of my favorite ones that anybody could pull up. Take a set of, I think it's like 9 crossing lines, white lines on a black background.
Okay.
And when you look at the intersection, at that intersection, you see a gray dot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a flat, one-dimensional thing. And you swear that's a gray dot there. But then when you cover up, you see, well, no, there's no gray dot there.
That's right.
But our brain, being influenced by the way our eye works, tells us there's a gray dot there. Or even more fun, there's some of these that they're those spirals that are one-dimensional, and you look at them long enough and they start spinning. A fixed object, and it starts spinning. We're like, holy smokes, how did I do that? But
out of nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, out of nothing.
Just an optical illusion.
Right. And so, kind of having that as a background, let's look at other things that we consider as, I know what that is. I know who I am. And so we're going to kind of dissect this a little bit to talk about how we might see ourselves. How do we format who we think we are? One aspect I know everybody's familiar with, but it's important to kind of look at this, is this is, Dwayne, right here in my body. Well, as we begin to investigate it and say, okay, can you show me where you are? Am I my eyelash? Well, no, that's my eyelash. Am I my ear? Well, no. My beard? No. My neck. And we just keep digging. And there is no place where I exist. Even like you would say, like the ear. Well, as you go dig in, there's other things and blah, 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 that make up what's called the ear, but that is not me. You can't drill down. I'm sure some of you physics majors and whatnot have looked at, when you start looking down microscopically and you keep seeing the same atom show up, and it just keeps going, keeps breaking down. And you never net any kind of solid identifiable thing that you could say is that person.
Right. There's no
So in
core
our
building
bodies,
block, right? There's no
yeah,
core center to any of that.
no core center, and of course, if you really, it's, what is, 95% of everything that we see is empty space. Um, what do they call it? Black matter or dark matter,
Hmm.
and yet no existence anywhere in that. Um, so that's, it's kind of interesting. It's like, well, okay. But I know who I am right now. All right. Well, then in the last 5 minutes, last 5 days, last 5 hours, were you the same person you were 5 weeks ago?
Hmm.
Well, no. What do you think you'll be the same person 5 months from now? Um, because you're changing. You eat things, you feel good, you feel bad. So even like with that, as we eat food and digest food, and we have sickness, we have better days. Are any of those you? Oh, I have a cold. Well, where is the I that has the cold? Oh, I feel good. Where is the I that feels good? We're this we're this process, and we may have sensations that change. I am sick. Well, is that who you are now, or were you somebody else 2 hours ago when you weren't sick? Or 3 days from now, and when you're no longer sick, are you a different person? And yet, so that's part of that illusion that we're creating based on our body or about
Hmm.
how we might feel. Now, the next one that goes in that is really important to dissect is what goes on in our head, what we consider goes on in our brain. And yet, when we look at neurologically, we're actually a lot more sophisticated than just our brain.
Hmm.
The nervous system, the muscles, the bones,
Right,
it
right.
all makes up how we interact with the world. Um, so let's say, it might be about our beliefs, our political beliefs, our religious beliefs. And we try to hold on to what we consider our political belief or our religious belief. And maybe we follow a certain teacher or a certain politician, um, and say, well, that's who I am. And then that person says something that you disagree with.
This is a good one.
Right.
This is a
And
really
then
good
it's
one.
like, yeah, it's like, okay, well, oh, so you were a big Bernie Sanders fan before, but are you now because he's done this other thing? Oh yeah, um, but there are things that you pick out. You look at the person who you identify with, and see if that holds true for your duration and their duration through a period of time. Obviously, obviously, if you really look at it, it's probably going to change. Well, what about our plans for the future? I'm going to do this, 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 and this. I'm going to get promoted within this job. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to retire. 6 months later, you pull into the parking lot, and there's these people with briefcases going in your building. And next thing you know, they closed the whole thing down. They sold it to somebody else. But I was, a level 1 supervisor on the 5th floor. And that's what I aspired to do. That's what my college degree was about.
Right,
This is
right.
everything. And then you don't have it. You've put everything into this, and it's gone through no fault of your own. But even if it was your fault, you were a bad employee or whatever, but you identified with that. But it changed. And so, are you now a different person? You start getting into, levels of schizophrenia, I guess you would call it, if you're not this person, but now you're this person. But no, I'm not that person. I'm this person.
It's
I'm
like
not this, but I'm now
multiple
that. It's like,
personalities.
well, who the hell are you? Yeah, how many personalities do you actually have? So that's, kind of beliefs and ideas. Another one that's quite painful to people is knowledge. Things that they've learned. Maybe they've gotten their degree, or they went to a trade school and became a master carpenter or a PhD in physics or whatever. And hopefully we've all realized that despite what we've learned, there's always more to learn.
Mm-hmm.
That if we hold on to certain knowledge and we don't learn to inquire, to look further, we could be dead in the water based on our knowledge pretty quickly, because things do change. When I went to college, 1,000 years ago, we took this very new, gonna be the thing in computer science. It was called Fortran. We had punch cards.
Fortran. Wow, I haven't heard that in a while.
I don't think you'll see anybody with a stack of punch cards to, dissect some sort of computer science.
It's amazing.
Obviously, it led to something else, but that is the change of knowledge. So, we're not our body, we're not our religion, we're not our political view. If we really look at it, we're not really our knowledge. But okay. I was raised in the deep South, and we led our life in a particular way, and didn't seem to be particular. And like for me, and we ate a certain type of food, and my folks always said, "Well, that's just country food."
Mm-hmm.
And then one day when I finally got out of Mississippi and I was on a military base, I went to a German restaurant. And I realized that despite my family being in that area of the world for the past 300 years, what I've been eating is German food all my
Oh, that's interesting.
life.
Country food
And
indeed.
this is just country food.
Yeah,
No, it was
wrong
German
country.
food. They didn't change anything. But, they
It's a different country.
identified it as just deep South food. It's like, no, it's Austrian food. And in fact,
Amazing.
one of maybe 20 years ago, one of my uncles went to Salzburg, which is where our last descendant left back in the 1700s, and he was asking for the family name, and it could be pronounced Restur or Resta. Well, it turns out that of the family that was identifiable there, guess what they were? They were just country people living up in the mountains.
Oh, that's so
So
funny.
so
Wow.
neither generation changed. They're still just old country folks
Wow.
living up in the mountains and raising chickens.
That's amazing. Passed
Yeah,
down generation to generation.
passed down generation to generation. But there was this big identification on who we thought we were, but it really wasn't. We've already talked about our job and stuff like that. You have a job, you identify with a job. And then the job goes away, or it wasn't quite what you thought it would be because
Right.
there may be some dysfunction within the organization, and then you leave. But all that time, especially on job, and I don't mean to sound anti-capitalist, but it works very good if you can identify yourself with your knowledge, with your degree, with your position. Then you just work right into that system.
Definitely.
And as long as you're pulled along by that kind of idea, and this is what we'll talk about later, this is where we get into having problems with why we identify ourselves. Because obviously, if we identify ourselves in a particular way, we begin to identify others in a particular way.
Definitely.
Get into comparing, contrasting, division, all sorts of problems. The reality, as is in the quote, when Guagu was his quote about that we have no permanent, separate, independent self. So as I was given in those examples, that we change, our knowledge changes, our culture changes, our belief system changes, even though we don't seem like they do. Our bodies change. We get older. We have health problems. They get over that. And so somewhere in there, we're trying to hang on to something that never existed. So that's that ever changing. But also when we think, well, um, when we were at our job and we identify ourselves by our position, it's like, well, I'm in charge of this organization right here, and I got this done, that done, that done. And then if you really look at it, that person is probably works with a whole group of people that also contributed to this ultimate outcome.
Yeah.
And yet, narcissistic type people, very self-centered type people, it's very easy to kind of look through this illusion with them, but we're the same way in our own way, that they may claim and take credit for something. And yet it was the coming together of a lot of stuff.
So many different people.
When I was a soldier, I was an officer. I knew damn well that there's no way I could ever complete a mission if it not been for the rank structure and the people that did very particular jobs.
I see.
It used to really bother me when I was a kid and I would read historical novels based on battles, and General such and such did this and General such and such did that. It's like, no, the hell he didn't. He had the rank and he might have given orders to get people in particular places, but it's the guy down there in the trenches, the guy with his boots on and his rifle, that actually makes a difference. That's that idea of independence, and it's a falsehood. You look into your anything that you do and show me that you did it all yourself. There was no layer of anybody else. You can't even drive to work and not have other people involved. Your car was manufactured from somebody. The road was made by different people. The building that you go into was somebody. The demand that created your job was there. All these complicated layers. And yet we want to say, I did this independently. It's not true. That's part of that illusion.
That's right.
So, taking that apart, that, obviously things change. We talk about impermanence. The things are involved at such a mass level of involvement that they're interconnected, or as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, was interbeing. But yet, especially as Americans, independence, it's an illusion. Yeah, we may be independent for at least the next few months of a king. That could change. But, so that's part of that illusion too, is that we're permanent and that we're independent. So I'll stop for now, so we maybe could go back and forth a little bit about that.
There's a lot of pride in that sort of sense of independence too. And while you were speaking, I thought of three different examples that might make it even more readily apparent how that's a falsehood, or an illusion, as you say. And these are not my examples. These are just like things that we've picked up along the way. One of them is just thinking about a clock, like I don't know, an old analog clock or your pocket watch or whatever. And just thinking that when we see that, we see the object and the mind immediately thinks clock, or we have this feeling of clock, as this independent entity. If we instead had seen like a smashed clock that had all the gears and bits and, bobs, whatever, on a table or on the floor, we'd probably think, oh, broken clock. And if we saw all the pieces laid out on the table, we knew a little bit about engineering, we might think, oh, those are the pieces of a clock. If we saw them, if somebody handed us a spring and we didn't know anything about clocks, we'd be like, oh, this is a spring. But then someone hands us, the arms of the clock or other pieces of the clock, and we start putting it together, we'd say, oh, okay, these are the makings of a clock. So in all of these different examples, when did the clock start being a clock and when did it stop being a clock?
Exactly.
Where in any of these pieces is the clock? And if we had them all, like I'm just thinking, you have all the pieces of a clock like spread out over a room, and I don't know that they were a clock, and I gather them all together, and then I start putting them together based on a diagram. When did it start being a clock for me? Because it wasn't when it started. I just saw a spring and a hand or a battery, whatever. Um, And so what that tells me is actually it's my mind that is creating the clock. The
Right.
pieces of the clock come together, but it's my mind that imputes upon it. That's a word that you hear sometimes, that projects upon it this static clockness. Exactly the way that we handle ourselves. That I think of myself as Psalm, and this is the second example. And I love this exercise to offer to students to because these concepts are not ones that we're automatically familiar with. They require deep introspection and hopefully a meditation method where you can reflect on these different concepts. Try to describe yourself in a manner that doesn't include your relationship to someone or something else. So you say, "Who are you?" "Oh, I'm me." "Okay, who's that?" "Well, I'm Sam." "Okay, where does the name Sam come from?" "Well, my parents
Right.
gave it to me." "Okay, well then, I'm a professor." "Okay, professor of what?" "You're a professor because you have students or because you work for an institution." "Okay, that doesn't work." "Well, I'm Iranian, American, English." "Okay, well, you're that because those nations exist." "What are those nations?" "Just, governments and people and structures and institutions built around geography." Okay. So we just keep peeling the onion like that, and we find that there is no way in which, this is a spoiler, there is no way in which I can describe myself that doesn't include a relationship with someone or something else. What we come to is a third example, which is a tried and true sort of Buddhist iconography of that of the wagon wheel, that it has spokes and maybe a couple of circles around it, but at the center, the hub, it's empty. There's nothing existent in the center of the wheel, but everything turns perfectly around it. That's a great illustration of the illusion of self. It's not that Psalm doesn't exist, Dwayne doesn't exist, or Psalm and Dwayne are the same people, or I'm equivalent to my microphone or to the clock or whatever. It's just that all of these things exist in relation to one another, and none of them have static, irreplaceable, I like this word that Guagu uses, reified selves.
Mhm.
Everything exists and operates perfectly in relation to one another. What that helps me to do when I think about that, when I reflect upon that, when I use meditation methods that encourage this experience of selflessness, I'm better able to move about the world without inserting myself into every conversation, into every opportunity to take credit for things, into every opportunity to make a relationship all about me.
Right.
Because if where this, I mean, this might feel very well and good when we're on the cushion and we're meditating about selflessness or compassion or something. But
Mhm.
the rubber meets the road when someone says, "Hey, you really pissed me off," or "You really hurt my feelings." And that sense of self becomes very strong. It's me, I, my. I didn't do it. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not um, the one who hurt your feelings. You did this to me. You pissed me off first. You started it, whatever. If I'm able to just see myself as the wagon wheel, that I'm everything's working, but there's no like static center. As you describe, we even our emotions change from minute to minute, from day to day, from year to year. Our political affiliations, our predispositions towards certain things. If I'm able to see myself as not, you know, so stuck in this reified center of me, I, and my, I can actually listen to that person and say, "Oh, I'm really sorry that I hurt your feelings. That wasn't my intention, and I'll do what I can to make up for it." I don't need to get involved. I don't need to take credit for the things that my company has done or my organization has done. If I see them as if I see myself as part of a greater whole that is working together to produce something. We see this a lot with, when people graduate or when they get a new degree, or something I hear a lot is, "I taught myself to blank. I taught myself to play guitar. I taught myself to computer program or whatever." That's not really accurate, is it? Like, it's
Yeah,
not like
no.
you picked up a guitar and just started playing and now you're a virtuoso. Yeah, maybe you looked at, YouTube videos or you followed courses, but somebody taught that information.
Right.
This,
Somebody invented the guitar.
yeah, it all comes from you know. Uh, I made this food. Well, you You cooked it, you put it together, you um, trimmed the vegetables or whatever. Somebody worked to put that on your table or put it in the
Right.
grocery market. There's a long supply chain to make that happen. And just to put a, kind of final point on this, the functional of expression, again, this is not mine. This is something that many Chan teachers, including Guagu and yourself, Dwayne, will say. The functional expression of this selflessness is compassion.
Yes.
When we take ourselves out of the picture, we're not so concerned about me, I, and my. Our concern is for the welfare of others. And so if you're in the mode of developing compassion, developing empathy, developing loving kindness, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to learn about this illusion of self
Hmm.
and decreasing that hold of that illusion. See behind the, what did you say, like the card playing or the magic trick. See behind that.
Right.
Uh, Compassion is essentially effortless because you're operating um, for the benefit of others.
Right. An important part of that, as we expand that. So let's say we finally, okay, I realize that I'm fluid, that I'm interconnected, that I'm always changing. But yet that asshole over here, I know that guy.
Oh yeah,
Hey, come on
exactly.
now. If you're not going to objectify yourself by descriptions, and you realize that you cut yourself a break and realize that you're fluid, guess what? Everything else is in the universe,
That's right.
um, including the universe itself. And so if we can kind of like, oh, that's right. I did really get heavily involved in that job description, identifying myself. But once I reeled back from that hurt, I realized that I had some other skills that I could translate and then get another job. And maybe I won't take that so seriously
That's right.
now because I realize that it may also go, or things change and I'm going to retire one day, and as soon as I get out to the parking lot, they replace me. That's how it goes. That's the flux of life. Flux. I had a friend, we were talking the other day, and after some time, she realized that flux is actually the way things are.
Hmm.
The things are fluid. But this idea that I want certainty, I want identification, I want things to be this way because we've identified them as this way. And yet it's an illusion, not only for ourselves, but for others and all other things. Just like you had given the great example of the clock. There's no one place that's the clock. And let's even if we extrapolate that a little bit further, me being kind of a weird kind of engineering mind guy, I'll take that clock apart and use those pieces to make something else.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
And then all of a sudden, there's absolutely no clockness to that clock. It's totally something different now.
Right, right,
With this woodworking or mechanical type stuff, it becomes something else.
right,
Well,
right,
so do we. Just like if we lost that job and we kind of redefined ourselves fluidly, hopefully, and then we became something else. Well, let's give everybody else that benefit of the doubt as well. Our pets, our house, our car, our yard, whatever. It is always changing. It is always involved with something else. Thich Nhat Hanh would give the wonderful example of you go out and you look at a tree and tell me where the tree is. Is it the leaves that fall on the ground? Is it the dirt? Is it the roof? Is it the sunshine? Is it the rain? Well, it's all of these things. So they're
beautiful.
always changing. And suddenly, to pull it out of this nihilistic view that, well, I'm nothing. No, you're everything, just like everybody is everything. And it's like watching an ongoing movie, of things just changing, always in flux. And there's a beauty in that when you step back and release this need for certainty, this need for security, and realize that everything's always fluid. And you're kidding yourself if you're going to try to solidify it or reify it, as Kwaku would say, because it can never be reified. It's always changing.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd love to for us to close on that note, just in the
Okay.
interest of time. But before we do, can you give us a quick practice that we can do this week while we're listening to this episode related to the illusion of self? Like, what would you say for us to pay attention to in our daily practice in this regard?
Um, just taking it back to the simple practice of meditation and focusing on the breath, um, and realizing that, as a thought comes in, that if we add to that thought, it becomes a story, becomes a narrative, becomes an opinion very, very quickly. But if we just kind of recenter and just see a passing thought like a cloud in the sky, that is just a passing thought. But even if we do kind of reify an idea, guess who did that? You did, um, in your own mind, and yet you created it. Again, you created an illusion, because if you change that thought or you kind of let go of it, it doesn't solidify. It
Hmm.
only solidifies under our own mind. And we only then we can, if we can kind of look at that, then we can decide whether or not I want to attach to that idea,
Right.
or I just want to let it be.
Beautiful. That's so great. Thank you. Do you do you want to close us out with the quote again?
Yeah, I think it's a good quote. There's many of them. I picked this out of one of Guagu's first books. Selflessness, emptiness, or not self, is one of the core teachings that free us from attachment and suffering. It is the realization that all things, including us, are related, that they have no permanent, separate, independent self. This does not mean that we have no personality. We always will have one, even after enlightenment or awakening. It is not that we do not know our name or do not recognize anyone or that our mind is blank. Enlightenment is not that at all. What is absent in the enlightenment of selflessness is the fundamental assumption that we are permanent, separate, and independent self within us and within all things. What we consider separate, independent, permanent, and solid is actually the coming together, the fluidity of everything else.
So beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing,
Mm-hmm.
Dwayne. And thank you everyone for tuning into the Off the Cushion podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more. And you can also leave us a comment or question. We also have an email address now if you want to send in feedback or your questions. That's offthecushionpodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.